Welcome to Sleepy Expeditions. Beneath the streets of Rome, in a stone cell 6 meters underground, a man is lying awake. Above him, the Colosseum. Tomorrow 100,000 Romans will fill its seats. The sand of the arena will be raked white and clean. The emperor will take his place. The gates will open, and this man will walk out into the light. He has done this 11 times before. He has survived 11 times before. You are that man tonight. You are a gladiator of Rome. Not the Hollywood version, not the dying hero of the cinema, but the real thing. A professional fighter in the most sophisticated entertainment industry the ancient world ever produced. A man who is simultaneously a slave, a celebrity, a commodity, and something that Rome cannot quite look away from. Find a comfortable position. Let the cool stone of the cell settle around you. Close your eyes. The torches are burning low. The cell is small, stone walls, close enough that you can touch both sides if you stretch your arms. A wooden pallet on the floor, covered with a rough wool blanket that is adequate for warmth but not for comfort. A clay oil lamp in a niche in the wall, its flame barely moving in the still underground air, casting more shadow than light. A bucket in the corner, a barred door of iron and heavy timber, locked from outside. This is where gladiators sleep the night before they fight. Not in punishment. The cell is not a prison cell in the modern sense, though the distinction is sometimes difficult to articulate. You are not here because you have done something wrong. You are here because you are property. And property is secured, and the Ludus, the gladiatorial school, takes no chances with its investment the night before it performs. Above you, Rome is going about its evening business. The sounds reach you faintly, the rumble of carts on stone streets, because wheeled traffic is banned during the day and the merchants use the night hours. The occasional shout or burst of laughter from a tavern somewhere in the direction of the Forum. The bark of a dog. The sounds of a city of 1 million people, compressed and filtered by the stone and earth between you and the surface. Arriving in your cell as something muffled and distant, like sounds heard through water. You have been in this cell for 3 days. Standard procedure before a major games. The gladiators are brought from the Ludus, the training school outside the city, to the holding cells beneath the arena itself, where they are kept close, fed well, monitored for any signs of illness or injury that might affect their performance. The food in these days is better than the ordinary training diet. More meat, more bread, more of the barley porridge that gladiators eat in quantities that would surprise most Romans, because the layer of fat it produces beneath the skin provides protection, padding around the vital organs that can mean the difference between a cut that bleeds and a cut that kills. You eat what you are given. You sleep when you can. You think about tomorrow. The cell next to yours contains a man you have trained beside for 2 years. A Thracian fighter, compact and fast, with a curved seeker blade and a small square shield. A style that requires speed and precision rather than the brute force of heavier fighters. You have sparred with him hundreds of times. You know his footwork the way you know your own. You know the slight tell in his left shoulder that precedes his favourite attack. Tomorrow you will not fight him. Tomorrow you are both fighting strangers, men from other schools, brought to Rome for this series of games. This is the standard arrangement. Gladiators from the same Ludus rarely fight each other, because the relationships formed in the training yard, the bonds of shared hardship and mutual respect that develop between men who spend years in close proximity preparing for the same ordeal, make such fights difficult to stage convincingly. The crowd wants to believe it is watching men who want to kill each other. The reality is considerably more complicated. The word gladiator comes from gladius, the short sword that was the primary weapon of the Roman legionary, and that some gladiatorial types carried. But the gladiators themselves were not simply sword fighters. They were performers, athletes, celebrities, slaves, volunteers, criminals, prisoners of war, and sometimes free men who had chosen this life for reasons that made sense only to them. The gladiatorial world contained multitudes, and reducing it to a simple image, the muscled fighter with a sword and a shield, fighting to the death in an arena of blood, misses most of what it actually was. Most gladiators were slaves, purchased by the Lanista, the owner and manager of a gladiatorial school, from slave markets, from the aftermath of military campaigns, from the courts that assigned criminals to the arena as a form of capital punishment. The slave who entered a gladiatorial school had lost his freedom, but he had gained something in its place: training, food, medical care, the possibility of fame, and the small but real chance that if he fought well enough and long enough, he might earn his freedom. The wooden sword, the rudis, awarded to a gladiator who had earned his discharge, was one of the most coveted objects in the Roman world. To receive it was to be free, to have fought your way out of bondage through the accumulation of victories and crowd approval and the good opinion of the people who owned you. It happened, not often, not to most gladiators, but it happened, and the possibility of it shaped the culture of the arena in ways that made simple brutality an insufficient description. Some gladiators were volunteers, free men, occasionally members of the equestrian class, the second rank of the Roman aristocracy, who signed the Infamia contract, accepting the legal degradation of gladiatorial status in exchange for the money and the glory. The Infamia was significant. A gladiator, even a free one, was legally in the same category as prostitutes and actors, denied certain civic rights, excluded from respectable social intercourse. To choose this was to give up something real in Roman society, and yet some men chose it, because the arena offered something that Roman society's normal structures did not: the direct, unmediated attention of the crowd. In the Colosseum, with 100,000 people watching, the successful gladiator was the most observed human being in the empire for the duration of his bout. The crowd knew his name, they cheered it. They brought small clay figurines of him to their homes. They wrote his name on the walls of buildings throughout the city. This is not nothing. The desire to be seen, to be recognized, to matter in the eyes of others. This is as human in 80 AD as it is in any other time. The gladiatorial arena was one of the few places in the rigid hierarchy of Roman society where a man of low birth could achieve a form of celebrity that transcended his origins. You are not a volunteer. You were captured in a military campaign in the province of Pannonia, the region that is now Hungary, when you were 19 years old. You spent 2 years as a general slave before a Lanista saw something in you at a slave auction and paid considerably more than the going rate for a field slave. He saw your size, your coordination, the way you moved when you were frightened, balanced, not frozen. He saw a fighter. He was right. You have been in the arena 11 times. You have won 11 times. The Ludus Magnus, the great training school, sits adjacent to the Colosseum, connected to it by an underground passage through which you walked 3 days ago when you were transferred to the holding cells. You have lived there for 4 years. The daily routine of a gladiatorial school is more structured than most Romans would imagine, and considerably more grueling. The morning begins before dawn. The trainers, the doctorers, are former gladiators themselves, men who survived long enough to develop the knowledge and the physical damage that makes retirement necessary, and they have no patience for anything less than complete commitment from their charges. The morning session is conditioning, running the perimeter of the training yard, which is large enough to feel punishing after the first 10 laps, but small enough to feel like a trap after 20. Then bodyweight work, the kind that builds the specific strength useful in the arena, pushing and pulling and wrestling. Movements that develop the core and the shoulders and the grip. Then weapons work with wooden practice weapons, the same weight as the real thing, designed so that the muscle memory developed in training translates directly to the arena. The palace is the center of weapons training, a heavy wooden post, man height, buried in the ground, against which every gladiator works for hours every day. You strike it, you thrust at it, you practice the footwork of attack and retreat around it. You develop the automatic movements that will happen faster than thought in the arena when there is no time for conscious decision. The afternoon session is technique, the specific techniques of your fighting style, which is the murmillo. The murmillo carries a large rectangular scetum shield and a gladius, and fights in the heavy style, relying on shield work and footwork and the ability to outlast an opponent through superior endurance and tactical patience. You have been trained to be patient. This was not natural to you when you first arrived. You were 19 and angry and had nothing to lose, which made you aggressive in ways that the doctor who trained you found unpromising. Aggressive fighters are predictable, he told you, in the flat practical way that doctorars speak about everything, as problems of mechanics rather than emotion. Predictable fighters die young. He trained the aggression out of you, not by suppressing it. You still have it. You can feel it sitting in your chest in the hours before a fight, a low heat that wants to become action, but you have learned to use it selectively, to let it fuel the physical effort while keeping the mind that directs the effort cold and clear. The heat in the service of the cold. Aggression as a resource, not a reflex. This took 2 years to learn. In those 2 years you sparred thousands of rounds against the other men of the Ludus, and the doctor watched and corrected and made you do the same movement again and again until it was automatic, and then moved on to the next movement, and the accumulation of thousands of hours of this produced what you now are, a fighter with 11 wins, lying in a cell beneath the Colosseum, waiting for the 12th. The system that produced you is older than the Colosseum. Gladiatorial combat in Rome predates the Empire, predates even the Republic in its later form. The earliest recorded gladiatorial games were held in 264 BC at the funeral of a Roman aristocrat whose sons staged the combat as part of the funeral rites. 3 pairs of slaves fought that day in the Forum Boarium, the cattle market of early Rome, before a crowd that had never seen anything quite like it. The crowd liked it. Within a generation, gladiatorial combat had moved from private funeral rite to public entertainment, from 3 pairs to dozens, from informal spaces to purpose-built venues. By the time the Colosseum was dedicated in 80 AD, the institution had been developing for 3.5 centuries, and it had developed the kind of institutional sophistication that 3 centuries of popular demand and competitive investment produce. The Lanista system is the economic engine of it all. A Lanista, the owner and trainer of gladiators, operates in a space that Roman society regards with a specific kind of moral ambivalence. The gladiatorial profession is officially classified as Infamia, the same legal category as actors, prostitutes, and auctioneers. People who engage in it or who profit from it directly carry a legal stigma that affects their civic standing. They cannot hold public office. They are excluded from certain social privileges. Their testimony in court carries less weight, and yet the games they produce are funded by emperors and cheered by senators, and watched by every social class in Rome with an enthusiasm that makes the official moral disapproval look like what it is, a performance of respectability that nobody really believes. Servilius navigates this contradiction with the pragmatism of a man who has been doing it for 20 years. He is wealthy. His Ludus is one of the best regarded in Italy, producing fighters whose records are discussed in Rome's taverns with the analytical intensity that other cities apply to chariot racing. He dines with men who would not admit in public that they know him, and he manages this with an equanimity born of understanding exactly what his position in Roman society is, and deciding that its advantages outweigh its limitations. The economics of gladiatorial ownership are more complex than they appear. A slave purchased for gladiatorial training costs considerably more than an agricultural slave. The physical requirements are more specific, the investment in training more substantial, the expected productive life shorter and more uncertain. A promising recruit might cost 15 to 20 times the price of a field slave at auction. Add the cost of housing, feeding, and providing medical care for a Ludus of 60 fighters for the years it takes to develop them into arena-ready performers, and the capital requirements are substantial. This investment is why gladiators rarely die. You will think about this more carefully in the hours before sleep comes, the economic reality that underlies the theatrical one. But first, the training itself. The curriculum of a gladiatorial school is designed to produce a specific kind of athletic intelligence, not raw strength or speed, though both matter, but the ability to apply physical capability with tactical precision under conditions of extreme stress. The first year is foundation. Your body, whatever it was before the Ludus, farm worker, soldier, criminal, prisoner of war, is systematically rebuilt. The diet changes first. Gladiators eat what Roman physicians call the gladiator's barley, large quantities of barley and beans, supplemented with ash from burned plant matter that provides minerals. The result is a diet that builds a specific kind of body, not the lean, defined physique of the athlete as modern culture imagines it, but something more practical. A layer of subcutaneous fat over well-developed muscle, providing both energy reserves for the sustained physical effort of a long bout and a degree of protection. A cut that reaches subcutaneous fat rather than muscle is painful but not fight-ending. The training itself begins with the palace. Every gladiatorial school has one, a wooden post man-height, buried firmly in the ground of the training yard. Every new recruit spends months working against the palace before they are permitted to work against a human opponent. The palace teaches distance, the specific distance at which your weapon is effective, the footwork required to maintain that distance or close it or increase it as the situation requires. It also teaches patience. The palace does not attack back, it does not move. Working against it is not exciting, not dramatic, not the kind of combat that a 19-year-old with something to prove wants to spend his days doing. It is repetitive and precise and occasionally maddening. It is also the foundation of everything. The doctor who ran your training understood something that is easy to state and difficult to internalize. That in the arena, the fighter who executes the correct technique under pressure will beat the fighter who attempts the more impressive technique and fails every time. The palace teaches correct technique through repetition so thorough that the technique becomes automatic. When the pressure of the arena arrives, the body does not need to think about the mechanics. The mechanics are already there, woven into muscle memory by months of work against a wooden post. After the palace, the wooden weapons. Same weight as the real thing, designed so that the training transfers directly. A fighter who has worked for a year with a wooden gladius of regulation weight will feel no unfamiliar heaviness when the real weapon is placed in his hand. The sparring with wooden weapons begins against other recruits, moves to more experienced fighters as skill develops, and eventually includes the supervised bouts that function as the arena's dress rehearsals, full contact sparring with blunted metal weapons, experienced enough to produce genuine pressure without the full lethality of the real thing. This is where you learnt what fear actually does to a body. Not from description, from experience. The first time you faced a more experienced fighter in a full contact spar, the fear arrived in your chest like something physical, a tightening that wanted to restrict your breathing and slow your thinking, and make your body do the opposite of what the training required. The doctor watched you manage it, or fail to manage it, and then spoke to you afterward with the same flat practicality he applied to everything. He said, "The fear will always come. Your job is not to make it stop. Your job is to keep working while it is there." This took a year to learn, but you learnt it. The men of the Ludus are not friends exactly. The word is too simple for what you are to each other. You are something more than colleagues and something less than family, bound together by a proximity and a shared experience that creates its own category of relationship, one that has no real equivalent outside the specific context of men who train together for violence and then wait together for the arena. You know each other completely in certain ways. You know how each man moves when he is tired, which is different from how he moves when he is rested. You know who wakes easily and who sleeps like stone and who talks in his sleep. You know who is frightened before a fight and who is not, though this distinction is less clear than it sounds because fear presents itself differently in different men, and some of the most frightened men you have ever known showed nothing on the surface. You know who has been in the arena and what they brought back from it, because the arena changes men, and the changes are visible to people who know what to look for. There is something that happens in the face of a man who has killed. Not guilt exactly, because guilt requires a framework of moral evaluation that the gladiatorial world does not provide, but something, a knowledge, a specific quality of having been somewhere that most people will never go, having done something that most people will never do, and carrying that with you afterward in ways you cannot fully articulate. Most of the men in the Ludus have this quality. You have it. It arrived after your third fight, which was the first one in which you killed your opponent. The first two had ended with the fallen man appealing to the crowd, and the crowd appealing to the editor, the official presiding over the games, who decides the fate of the defeated. And both times the editor had granted life. The defeated men had fought well, the crowd was generous, and the economics of the situation favoured mercy. Dead gladiators are expensive to replace, and a well-fought bout that ends with both men alive is often more crowd-pleasing than one that ends in death. The third fight ended differently. Your opponent was older, slower, a fighter whose best years were behind him. He fell, and the crowd turned their thumbs, and the editor made the decision, and you looked at the man on the ground, and he looked at you, and you did what was required of you. Afterward, in the cell, you sat for a long time without moving. The doctor came eventually and checked you for injuries, minor ones, cuts that needed cleaning, bruising that would heal. And then he said, in the same flat practical voice he used for everything, "You did well, go eat." You went and ate. But something had changed, and you knew it had changed, and the men in the barracks knew it too, because they had been through it themselves, and they recognized the specific look of a man who has passed through that particular door and knows he can never step back through it. They did not make it into something large. They did not give it ceremony or acknowledgement. They just nodded slightly and made room for you at the table and passed you the bread, and the evening continued. This is the Brotherhood of the Ludus. Not warmth exactly, not the easy affection of men who chose each other, but something solid and reliable. The knowledge that the men around you understand what you are, and do not require you to be anything else. Rome is above you tonight, going about its enormous complicated life. You have been in this city for 4 years, and you know it the way you know anything you have observed carefully from the outside. Its patterns, its rhythms, its particular logic, but you do not know it the way its citizens know it, because you are not a citizen, and the city that exists for you is not the city that exists for them. For the senators and the merchants and the free poor of Rome, the city is a home. However complicated, however dangerous in places, however demanding of its inhabitants, it is theirs. They were born into it, or chose to come to it, or built something in it that makes it feel like an extension of themselves. For you, it is the place that owns you. This is not entirely accurate in legal terms. Technically, the Lanista owns you, and the Lanista belongs to the Roman world of commerce that the city enables. But the sensation, on the occasions when you have been taken out into the city, for the pompa, the ceremonial procession before the games, when the gladiators parade through the streets in their armour, while the crowd lines the route to see you, is of being inside something enormous and indifferent that has decided what your function is and has no particular interest in your feelings about that function. The crowd at the pompa is extraordinary. You have processed through the streets of Rome 4 times now, and each time the scale of the crowd surprises you, because knowing intellectually that Rome contains 1 million people, and experiencing the density of that 1 million people pressed against the edges of a processional route, are very different things. The noise is physical, not just sound, but pressure. The sound waves of hundreds of thousands of voices combining into something you feel in your chest. They call your name. This is the strange part. They know your name. It is written on the program for the games, circulated through the city in the days before, discussed in the taverns by men who study the matchups with the same attention they give to chariot races. They know your record, they know your style, they have opinions about your prospects. You are, in this specific and limited sense, famous. The fame is real and entirely conditional. It exists only in relation to your function. The same people who shout your name at the pompa would not look at you twice if you were a slave at a market. The fame is not about you, it is about what you do in the arena, and the arena is a mirror in which Rome sees certain things about itself reflected and amplified. What things? This you have thought about in the long hours of the Ludus when training is done and sleep has not yet come. What does Rome see in the arena that it wants to see? Courage, clearly. The crowd responds to courage with a generosity that transcends its normal social categories. A slave who fights with genuine courage is cheered as warmly as a free volunteer. Courage is a Roman value that cuts across the usual distinctions, but also something else, something darker and harder to name. The arena provides a space where consequences are real, where the stakes are actual life and death, in a city where most of the violence that maintains its social order happens elsewhere, in the provinces, in the legions, at the edges of the empire. The arena brings that violence home, makes it visible, gives it form and spectacle, and the satisfying clarity of a defined outcome. Rome sends its violence to the edges of the world, and then it builds an enormous stone bowl in the center of the city and watches a version of it for entertainment. You have thought about this. You have not reached a conclusion. The games tomorrow are given in the name of the Emperor Titus. Titus Flavius Vespasianus, son of Vespasian, who began the construction of the Colosseum and who died before its completion, leaving it to his son to dedicate. Titus dedicated the Colosseum last year with 100 days of games that are still talked about in every tavern in Rome. 9,000 animals killed, gladiatorial bouts that went from dawn to dusk, naval battles staged in the flooded arena, the full spectacle of Roman public entertainment deployed at maximum scale. The games are not entertainment exactly, or rather, they are entertainment, but entertainment is not a category that quite captures what they are. The Latin word is munus, gift, or duty, or offering. The games are given by someone to someone, and the relationship between giver and receiver encodes a set of political meanings that everyone in Rome understands without having to articulate them. The emperor gives the games to the people of Rome. The people receive them. The transaction communicates something about the emperor, his generosity, his power, his regard for the Roman people, and something about the people who are the audience that the transaction requires. The games are, in this sense, a form of political speech in a society that does not have elections, where the relationship between ruler and ruled must be managed through other mechanisms. Bread and circuses. The satirist Juvenal will write this phrase a few decades from now as a critique. The Roman people, he will suggest, have traded their political engagement for food and entertainment, have abandoned the civic virtue of the Republic for the passive pleasures of the imperial arrangement. You will not be entirely wrong, but the people who fill the Colosseum tomorrow are not simply passive recipients of imperial bounty. They are participants. The crowd at the games has power, real power, exercised in real time, the thumbs turned up or down, the shouts that advocate for mercy or death, the opinion of 100,000 people expressed simultaneously in a space designed to amplify and communicate it. This is not nothing. The editor who presides over the games, however powerful, generally follows the crowd's verdict, because the games are a performance of imperial generosity, and the point of the performance is defeated if the audience is alienated. The crowd can save a gladiator's life. This is not a small power. You have benefited from it twice. Lying on the sand, breathing hard, waiting for the decision that will determine whether you get up. Both times the crowd was generous. Both times the editor followed the crowd. Both times you walked out of the arena alive. You are grateful to the crowd in the specific, limited way that you are grateful to anyone whose decision worked in your favor, without illusion about the nature of the relationship, without expectation that the same decision will be made next time. The crowd is not your friend, but it is not your enemy either. It is something stranger, an enormous volatile entity with a collective opinion that can be won or lost through the quality of your performance, that responds to courage and skill and the particular drama of a well-fought bout, that can be moved toward mercy by a fighter who gives it something worth mercy. Tomorrow, you intend to give it something worth mercy. The gladiatorial world has its own taxonomy. Not all gladiators are the same. The arena has developed over 2 centuries of Roman games, a set of distinct fighting types, each with its own equipment and style and traditional opponents. The matchups between them as codified and understood by the Roman crowd as the rules of any sport. You are a murmillo. The murmillo is the heavy fighter, large rectangular shield, short gladius, heavy helmet with a fish crest that gives the type its name, greave on the left leg. The style is attritional. You use the shield to control the space between you and your opponent, to deflect and absorb, to wait for the opening that comes when the other man has committed to an attack and cannot recover in time. Then you strike, clean, short, precise. The gladius is not a weapon for the sweeping blow, but for the thrust. The point going to the specific target with the minimum of movement. Your opponent tomorrow is a Rotirius, the Netman, the most distinctive of the gladiatorial types, and in some ways the most theatrical. The Retiarius carries a large weighted net for throwing, a long trident, and a dagger for close work. He wears no helmet, almost no armor, just an arm guard on the left arm and a shoulder guard on the left side. He is light, fast, dependent on mobility and distance. The matchup between Murmillo and Retiarius is one of the classic pairings of the arena, and the crowd understands it completely. The heavy fighter tries to close the distance, to get inside the range where the net and trident are less effective and the gladius can work. The light fighter tries to maintain distance, to use the net to entangle the shield or the legs, to make the heavy fighter fight on unfavourable terms. It is a chess game played with bodies. You have fought a Rotarius twice, won both times, but each win was different. The first was quick, a fortunate opening in the third exchange that the other man did not close in time. The second was long, 20 minutes of work, exhausting in a way that the first was not. Your shield arm burning by the end from the weight of the scutum and the effort of keeping it properly positioned. You do not know the man you are fighting tomorrow. His name is on the program Proculus, from a Ludus in Capua, and his record is noted 9 fights, 7 wins, 1 loss in which the crowd granted him mercy, 1 draw. A good record, a careful fighter, probably, given that loss survived and the draw. Fighters with bad records do not accumulate 9 bouts. You think about him without quite thinking about him. Your mind skirts the reality of what tomorrow means, not from fear exactly, but from the particular discipline of a fighter who has learned that thinking too specifically about the opponent before the fight is not useful. What you need tomorrow is not a mental model of Proculus built from the information on a games program. What you need is the ability to read what is actually in front of you in real time and respond to it faster than your opponent responds to you. Thinking too much now gets in the way of that, so you think about other things. The Roman crowd knows what it wants. This is one of the things you have learned in 4 years. The crowd at the arena is not a passive audience, but an expert one. They have been watching gladiatorial games since childhood. They understand the styles and the matchups and the tactical situation at every moment of a bout, and they respond to skill and courage and drama with a precision that no amount of simple bloodlust can explain. They do not simply want death. This is the misunderstanding that outsiders, provincials who have never seen the games, visitors from cultures without this tradition often make. They imagine the crowd as a howling mob demanding violence, insatiable, satisfied only by killing. The reality is more nuanced and in some ways more disturbing. The crowd wants a performance that includes the possibility of death, because the stakes must be real for the drama to be real. But that is not simply an execution. The crowd distinguishes between a gladiator who fights well and dies, and one who fights badly and dies, and they respond to these differently. A man who gives everything and falls with honor receives the crowd's mercy more reliably than a man who fights poorly and survives. Courage is the currency of the arena. Not victory, courage. You have seen men lose bouts and survive because the crowd judged their effort worthy of life. You have seen men win bouts and leave the arena to silence, because the victory was achieved in a way the crowd found unsatisfying. Too quick, too one-sided, lacking the drama that 100,000 people came to see. The crowd is watching for specific things. The moment when the outcome becomes uncertain. When a fighter who was winning makes an error and suddenly the bout is balanced again. The drama ratcheting up instantly, the recovery when a fallen fighter rises, when someone who seemed finished finds something and continues, the exchange of blows that requires both men to abandon defense and simply fight, the mutual commitment that produces the most dangerous moments and the most electric crowd response. And sometimes, rarely but memorably, the moment of mercy, the fallen fighter appealing, the crowd turning, the editor deciding, the standing fighter stepping back. The recognition in that moment that the bout has produced something worth sparing, that the defeated man fought well enough that his death would be a waste rather than a conclusion. These moments are what the crowd remembers, not the killing, the mercy. Tomorrow you intend to give the crowd a performance worth remembering. Whether it ends in mercy or death, yours or Proculus's, is not something you can control, but the quality of what happens between the gate of life and the conclusion of the bout is within your power, and it is the only thing that is. The man who owns you is named Gaius Servilius. He is 53 years old, a former gladiator himself, retired with the Rudies after 16 bouts, which is an extraordinary record, the kind that happens maybe once in a generation. He walks with a slight limp from a wound taken in his 12th fight that healed imperfectly, and his face carries the particular map of scar tissue that accumulates on men who spend years in the arena. He is not cruel. This is worth saying, because the image of the Lanista in Roman popular culture tends toward the monstrous, the scheming, brutal owner who treats his fighters as livestock and cares nothing for their welfare beyond their economic value. Servilius is not this. He is a businessman, and his fighters are his inventory, and he has the businessman's interest in maintaining his inventory in good condition. But he is also a former gladiator, and he has a former gladiator's respect for the specific quality of the men who do what he once did. He visited your cell this afternoon. He came alone without the retinue of assistants that usually accompanies him, just himself and the guard who unlocked your door and then stepped back to give the illusion of privacy. He sat on the edge of your pallet and looked at you for a moment without speaking, the way he always does before he says something worth saying. Then he told you about Proculus. He had received information from contacts in Capua, the other Ludus's staff, the informal networks of knowledge that flow between the gladiatorial schools of the Empire. Proculus is left-handed, not ambidextrous, genuinely left-hand dominant, which means his trident work comes more naturally from the right side of his body than from the left, which is the opposite of the standard Rotarius technique. He has a tendency to throw the net early when he is under pressure. The net is his comfort, and he reaches for it before the situation strictly requires it. This is useful information. Servilius gave it to you without ceremony and without instruction. He does not tell his fighters how to fight, because men who have survived 11 bouts do not need to be told how to fight. He gives information and trusts his fighters to use it. Then he stood up, and his knee gave him a moment of trouble, and he steadied himself against the wall with a hand that still carries the calluses of years of sword work. And he looked at you. "Good luck tomorrow," he said. Not an emotional statement, not quite even sincere, but not empty either. Somewhere between the two, the specific register of a man who has been where you are going and knows that luck is real, and that its invocation before a fight is not superstition, but acknowledgement of the honest uncertainty of what the arena produces. Good luck. He left. The door was locked behind him. You ate your evening meal. You lay down on the pallet. You are lying there now, in the torchlight, in the stone cell, listening to the sounds of the city above and the breathing of the men in the adjacent cells. There is a woman in Rome who knows your name, not from the games program, not from the walls of the buildings where your victories have been painted in large letters by the fans who celebrate you. She knows it because you told her yourself, in the brief hours outside the Ludus that are occasionally permitted to fighters with good records, a reward and also a calculated investment in morale, because men who have something to return to fight with a particular kind of determination. Her name is Faustina. She works in a fuller's shop near the Tiber, cleaning and treating cloth, hard work that leaves her hands rough and her arms strong. She is a freed woman, born a slave, purchased by the fuller who employs her, and granted her freedom 3 years ago in the terms of his will, so that she has been free for 2 years now, navigating the specific challenges of a freed woman in Rome, which are considerable but considerably better than the alternative. You met at a festival, one of the many religious celebrations that punctuate the Roman calendar, days when normal work stops and the city gathers in its neighborhoods for food and music and the temporary suspension of the usual social distances. You were there with 2 other fighters from the Ludus, permitted out for the day under the loose supervision of a guard who had learned over years that this particular group of men would not cause trouble and would return when required. You saw her across the crowd, and something happened that you would not have predicted. Not the simple desire that is easy enough to feel, but something more considered, more attentive. You noticed her, and then she noticed you noticing her, and she did not look away. She knows what you are. This is not a small thing. The social status of a gladiator is Infamia, the same legal category as actors and prostitutes, regardless of personal virtue or individual reputation. A woman who associates with a gladiator accepts a degree of social stigma by association. Faustina, as a freed woman already navigating the Roman social world from a position of limited advantage, takes a real risk in this association. She takes it anyway. You have thought about why. You have arrived at the conclusion that it is because she, like you, has already been outside the protection of respectable Roman society and knows that the respectability in question is contingently distributed and not worth the sacrifice of everything that might make life actually livable. She visited you at the Ludus 2 weeks ago, one of the official visit days when families and connections are permitted to come. She brought food, honey cakes and dried figs, things she spent money on that she probably could not comfortably afford. She sat across from you in the visiting area and talked about small things, the fuller's shop, a neighbour dispute, a cat that had taken up residence on her windowsill and refused to leave. You listened to every word. When the time was up and she left, she touched your hand briefly as she passed and said nothing, and that touch is something you have returned to many times in the 2 weeks since. The specific warmth of it, the deliberateness of it, the thing it communicated without words. You think about her now, in the cell, not with sentimentality. You have trained yourself out of sentimentality, because sentimentality in your situation is a form of self-torture. But with the particular quality of attention that you give to things you value and want to keep, tomorrow you intend to come back from the arena. This is not a guarantee, it is an intention. The difference matters. Here is something Rome does not advertise, and Hollywood will never tell you. Most gladiators did not die in the arena. This fact, supported by the archaeological and historical record, contradicts almost everything that popular culture has built around the image of gladiatorial combat. The blood-soaked sand, the inevitable death, the crowd howling for killing. The reality is considerably more complicated and, in some ways, more interesting. The economics are simple and decisive. A trained gladiator represents an enormous investment of time and money. The purchase price of a promising recruit are years of feeding and housing and training and medical care. The development of the specific skills that make a fighter valuable as a performer. All of this adds up to a sum that makes the casual destruction of a gladiator in every bout economically irrational. Dead gladiators cannot fight again. A Lanista who sends his fighters to their deaths in every bout will run out of fighters. He will also run out of the income those fighters generate, the fees charged to the editor who commissions the games, the prize money won in successful bouts, the reputation that attracts future bookings. The gladiatorial business model requires fighters who survive to fight again, accumulate records, develop the public recognition that makes them worth paying to see. The historical record supports this. Epigraphic evidence from the gladiatorial world, tombstones, commemorative inscriptions, training records that have survived, suggests that the death rate in arena bouts was considerably lower than popular imagination assumes. Estimates vary among historians, but the numbers consistently suggest that somewhere between 1 in 8 and 1 in 10 bouts ended in the death of one of the participants. 9 out of 10 fights ended with both fighters alive. The missio, the granting of mercy, was the normal outcome of a bout in which one fighter was clearly defeated. The defeated man appealed, the crowd rendered its verdict, the editor made the decision, and in most cases the decision was life. This is not to say the arena was safe. The injuries accumulated over a gladiatorial career were real and cumulative. Archaeological analysis of gladiatorial skeletal remains from the period shows evidence of healed fractures, joint damage, the specific patterns of wear and injury that a body accumulates from years of combat training and arena performance. Gladiators died younger than the general population, and the deaths that did occur in the arena were real deaths with real consequences for the men who suffered them and the people who cared about them. But the arena was not, as the popular image suggests, a machine for producing corpses. It was a machine for producing drama. And drama, the Roman entertainment industry had learned over 3 centuries of refinement, does not require death. It requires the possibility of death, the genuine, unfeigned knowledge on the part of the crowd that what they are watching carries real stakes, that the men on the sand are in genuine danger, that the outcome is genuinely uncertain. The possibility of death produces the drama. The actuality of death in every bout would make the drama routine. This is the paradox at the center of the gladiatorial system. It is simultaneously more brutal than modern sensibility can comfortably accommodate, and considerably less brutal than the version we have constructed in our collective imagination. The men who designed it understood something about spectacle that takes years to learn and is difficult to articulate. That scarcity increases value, that death is most powerful as drama when it is possible, rather than inevitable, that an audience which watches a man fight well and survive will return to watch him fight again, will invest in his continued existence, will feel something when he steps onto the sand that they would not feel if he were simply one in an endless succession of disposable performers. The crowd knew the fighters, not personally in most cases, but as presences, as recurring figures in the ongoing drama of the arena. They knew records and fighting styles and the particular qualities that made certain fighters worth watching. They had opinions about matchups and predictions about outcomes and preferences among the different types. This knowledge was built on continuity, on the same fighters appearing in the arena again and again, developing and refining their skills, accumulating the experience that makes a seasoned gladiator something genuinely different from a new recruit. More interesting to watch, more capable of producing the quality of performance the crowd came to see. You have fought 11 times. Your record is known. when your name appears on the game's program, there are people in Rome who have opinions about your prospects tomorrow, who have watched you fight before, who remember specific moments from specific bouts, who have developed a relationship with your continued existence that is not friendship, but is not nothing either. They want you to survive tomorrow, not out of sentiment, out of investment, the accumulated investment of attention and knowledge and the specific pleasure of watching someone get better at something over time. You will try not to disappoint them. The torch in the niche is burning lower now. The oil is nearly gone, and when it runs out, the cell will be dark. Not the partial darkness of a curtained room at night, but the complete darkness of underground stone. A darkness that has no gradations, no shapes emerging as the eyes adjust, just the simple absence of light. You have been in this darkness before. The first time was your second night at the Ludus, when the lamp oil ran out and no one came to replenish it, and you lay in the dark for what felt like hours before sleep came. You were 19 and frightened, and the darkness felt like a presence rather than an absence, like something that was doing something to you rather than simply being there. That feeling passed. It passed the way many things pass in the Ludus, not through resolution or understanding, but through sheer repetition, the gradual accumulation of experience that teaches the nervous system that a thing it found threatening is not actually threatening, that the response it was generating was disproportionate to the actual situation. You are not afraid of the dark anymore. You are afraid of other things. The fear that exists the night before a fight is not the acute physical fear of the moment in the arena when something goes wrong. That fear arrives too fast for analysis, registers in the body rather than the mind, produces action rather than thought. The fear of the night before is different, slower, more thoughtful, more honest. It is the fear of not being enough, not of dying exactly. You have made your accommodation with the possibility of death in the way that anyone in your profession must eventually make it, acknowledging it honestly, understanding it as one of the possible outcomes rather than the probable one, and then setting it aside not because it is not real, but because dwelling on it serves no purpose. The possible outcomes of tomorrow's fight are a fixed set. You win, you lose, and the crowd grants mercy. You lose and the crowd does not. Two of these outcomes involve you walking out of the arena alive. One does not. The proportions are not in your favor, and you have made your peace with this. But the fear of not being enough, of walking out onto the sand and finding that what you have is insufficient for what the day requires, this is harder to set aside. This is the fear that the doctor who trained you addressed most directly, he said. The preparation is already done. What you have trained is already inside you. Tomorrow is not when you build what you need. Tomorrow is when you use what is already built. Trust the work, trust the work. You have returned to this many times in the years since he said it, and it has always been true. The fights where you have been most frightened before have not been the ones where you fought worst. The fear, properly directed, is fuel. It sharpens the attention, accelerates the reactions, produces a quality of presence in the arena that training alone does not. But there is a kind of fear that is not fuel. You have seen it in other men, the fear that becomes paralysis, that locks the body and the mind simultaneously, that produces the specific quality of stillness in a fighter that the experienced eye can read from across the training yard. This fear does not sharpen, it dulls. It makes men slow and tentative and predictable, which in the arena is a form of danger more immediate than anything the opponent can produce. The Doctor recognized this fear in certain recruits in the early weeks of their training, and he addressed it with a particular kind of directness that you have come to understand over years was also a form of care. He put those men in the ring, not to harm them, not to humiliate them, but because the only cure for the fear that produces paralysis is the experience of surviving what you feared. The recruit who freezes before the first sparring bout and is then gently but firmly pushed into it and emerges from it alive and largely unharmed. This recruit has received information that his nervous system could not supply through reasoning alone. He has learned in his body rather than his mind that the thing he feared was survivable. You were not one of those recruits. Your fear in the early weeks was not the paralysis kind, but the aggression kind. The fear that expresses itself as attack, as the attempt to end the threat before it can fully materialize. This is a natural response, and in certain contexts an effective one. But in the arena it is dangerous because it is predictable, and predictable is what you cannot afford to be. The Doctor cured it the same way he cured everything, through repetition. He put you in the ring with men who were better than you, and he let you be aggressive, and he watched the aggressive approach fail again and again until your nervous system accepted that aggression was not reliably effective, that patience was more productive, that the discipline of waiting for the right moment rather than forcing a moment that was not right was the more efficient path to the outcome you wanted. This took longer than the paralysis cure, but it worked. And what you are left with now, 11 fights later, is a fear that is neither paralyzing nor explosive. A fear that sits at the correct volume, audible enough to keep you alert, quiet enough to leave room for thought. A fear that you have learned to work with rather than against. This, you think, is what the arena actually teaches. Not courage in the simple sense, the absence of fear, the immunity to it, but something more valuable and more honest. The relationship with fear that produces good decisions under pressure. The knowledge earned through experience that cannot be simulated, that you can be afraid and still function, still think, still choose the correct response rather than the reactive one. This knowledge cannot be given, it can only be accumulated fight by fight in the specific crucible of real stakes and real consequences, and the real discovery of what you are capable of when the stakes are as high as they get. 11 fights, 11 times through that crucible, and here you are on the other side of all of them, lying in a cell beneath the Colosseum, listening to the city breathe above you, neither frozen nor exploding, simply present in the darkness, with the fear at its correct volume, doing what it is supposed to do, telling you that tomorrow matters. You already know that tomorrow matters, but it is good to be reminded. In the morning before the games begin, there will be a meal. The Cena Libera, the free dinner, or more precisely the final meal, is one of the traditions of gladiatorial culture that has attracted the most attention from the Romans who write about it, because it carries an obvious symbolic weight. The night before the games, the gladiators are given a meal open to the public. Citizens of Rome who wish to come can enter and observe the fighters eating, can speak to them, can study them in the particular way that people study those they are about to watch perform under conditions of extreme pressure. It is theatre. It is also real. The food at the Cena Libera is the best you will eat at any meal during your time at the Ludus. Not the careful protein-heavy diet of ordinary training, but the food of a celebration. Roasted meats, bread with olive oil, wine measured out generously but not so generously that the morning brings consequences. You eat at these meals with a concentration that others sometimes find surprising. Not the nervous eating of a man trying to distract himself. The deliberate, attentive eating of someone who understands that this meal is fuel. That the food you put into your body tonight will be, in some portion, what your muscles use tomorrow, and who treats it with the respect due to something that matters. After the meal, the ritual preparations. Before a fight, gladiators pray. This is not remarkable. Romans pray before everything that matters, addressing the gods who preside over the specific domain relevant to the specific need. Before a fight, Mars is the obvious choice, but fighters also pray to Fortuna, the goddess of luck, because even the most skilled gladiator in the most favourable matchup is still subject to the random variable of the throw or the slip or the sun in the eyes at the wrong moment. You pray to both. Not elaborately. You are not a man who believes that the gods respond to eloquence. A few words clearly stated. An acknowledgement of the situation. A request for the specific kinds of help that are within the domain of the god being addressed. Mars, give me strength and clear thought. Fortuna, let the random variables fall my way. That is sufficient. Then the arming. Your equipment has been checked and rechecked by the armourer who is responsible for it. The helmet, the scutum, the gladius, the greave. Each piece examined for any fault, any weakness in the metal, any looseness in the fittings that might matter in the arena. The armourer is thorough in the way that someone whose professional reputation depends on the functioning of the equipment he is responsible for is always thorough. You trust the equipment. You put it on piece by piece with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this many times. The greave first, buckling it to the left leg, the leather padding underneath protecting the skin from the metal edge, then the arm guard on the right arm, then the heavy scutum strapped to the left forearm, its familiar weight settling into place, then the helmet, the cheek guards framing your vision, the heavy fish crest above. You are no longer yourself, quite. You are a murmillo. The gate of life is ahead of you. The morning light visible at the top of the ramp, the sound of 100,000 people audible even here, below the sand in the tunnel that leads up to the arena. The roar of it is something you feel in your chest rather than hear with your ears. But that is the morning. Tonight, the torch is burning its last. The cell is warm enough, the wool blanket pulled up, the stone floor steady beneath the pallet. The sounds of Rome above are quieter now. It is past midnight, the cart traffic thinning as the night deepens, the taverns closing one by one, the enormous city settling into the few hours of actual quiet that it allows itself between the end of the night's commerce and the beginning of the day's. You breathe slowly, the torch goes out. The darkness is complete, but you are not afraid of the dark. You think about Faustina and her honey cakes and the cat on her windowsill. You think about the doctor who trained you and his flat practical voice saying trust the work. You think about the 11 fights and what they taught you about what you are capable of. And you find, as you always find when you examine this honestly, that what you are capable of is more than you thought at the beginning. The arena taught you this, not as a lesson, not deliberately, but as the simple byproduct of being tested and surviving the test again and again, until the testing is less frightening than it was because you know what you can do. Tomorrow is another test. You will take it as you have taken the others, with everything you have, with the patience the doctor trained into you, with the specific kind of courage that is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act well in its presence, and then you will see what happens. The darkness of the cell is absolute and comfortable. Rome breathes above you. The moon is somewhere above Rome, above the Colosseum, above all of it. Sleep now, Gladiator. The morning will come when it comes.